Okay, welcome back. So for this video, we are going to add the collision code that allows us to jump on the heads of our enemies, which is a common mechanic in platform games, and if we hit the enemies in any other way, if we run into them, they'll kill us. Okay, as always, you're choosing what mechanics that you have in these games. So if you don't want to be able to jump on the enemies' heads, then just ignore a large part of this particular video. But you will need to code in the way that you're going to deal with the enemies. If it's a shooting mechanic, then again, you've got reference from the shooter instructional sheets that I've given you on how to do that. Okay, so we're mainly working with code. We shouldn't need to work on the layout much today. So go to the event sheet. You're going to be learning a couple of extra things here that you've maybe not used before. So the code is a little bit more sophisticated, especially when it comes to jumping on the enemy's head. So the first thing we need is an event of what happens when the player hits the enemy. Okay, so let's add event, player colliding with another object, and choose the enemy. Okay, now we're not actually going to put anything on the action next to this, because what we're going to do is have a bunch of sub events that happen because we want different things to happen with this one event. You could do this as lots of different events, but that's not as efficient, and you're duplicating code, and whenever you start duplicating code, that's when memory increase goes up and you start to have bugs and all sorts of other things. So we're going to put all this on one code. So we've created that now. What happens when the player hits the enemy? Leave that where it is. Now let's have another bit of code that basically, or another event rather. What happens when the player, and if you scroll down and go to, is falling. So the first thing we're going to do is basically jumping on their heads, okay, and killing them. So there's a number of factors that we need the game to recognize if we're going to kill them only when we're jumping on their heads. The enemy needs to be below the player, and the player needs to be falling. Yeah, because if we're not specific like that, then it can create other situations where we'll accidentally kill enemies, like on a ladder, for instance. We don't want to kill them when they're underneath us on a ladder because you're not jumping on them. So that wouldn't work because you're not falling, you're actually on a ladder, is an example. So is the player falling? Okay, but we also want another condition on this same event. So I think you may have done this in the past, but when you right click on the event, you can go to add another condition. So remember, all these conditions have to be fulfilled before this bit of code will kick in, before the event is considered to be done, and therefore the action takes place. So let's add another event. And what we're checking for is we're checking for whether the player is underneath, the enemy is underneath the player. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on player square, and we're going to basically come down the list until we get to compare Y. So this essentially allows us to compare the Y coordinate against something else. The Y coordinate, if you remember on your 2D graph, is the one that runs from top to bottom. So at the top is 0, and as it runs down, it gets to whatever the height of your layout is, in our case 480. So compare Y, let's click next. And we want to, we basically want to say, well, what are we comparing then? Well, we're comparing where the enemy is. So if we want the player to be higher, then their Y coordinate is going to be less than the enemy coordinate, because if 0 is at the top and say 480 is at the bottom, we want to be lower. So we want to go less than. And what coordinate do we want to be less than? Well, we want to be less than the the enemy coordinate. So that'll be enemy1 dot y. And that's basically saying the y coordinate of the enemy. And this is how Construct likes to display any attributes of a particular object are displayed like that. The name of the object, a dot, a full stop, and then whatever attribute it is. So we could say x for the x coordinate. We could say the the size, the movement, the speed. They can all be done like that. Okay, so this is how we refer to something else. So click done, and now you should have an event that checks for is the player falling, and is the player above the enemy. And it's confusing, isn't it? Because they're above the enemy, but their y coordinate is less than. And if those two things are true, then what do we want to happen? Well, what we want to happen is we want the enemy to be destroyed. So click on Add Action, click on Enemy, click on Next, and you can scroll down to Destroyed, or you can just click it in the search box here. Might be easier. So I'll click Destroy. In a lot of platform games, to give the player that feedback and to make the game feel better, they have the player bounce up slightly. And so we want to click Add another action, and we want the player to have this little bounce up as they go up. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to add another action, click on Player Square. And to do this, we scroll down till we get to the platforming, and we want to set vector Y. In other words, we want to set the movement up, which is on the y-axis, isn't it? Anything to do with up or down is on y. So, and vector is the kind of the movement up. So click next. And again, you can, depending on how much you want them to bounce off something, you can set this number, but I'm going to say -500. Okay, as the starting one, you'll see how that works, and then you can change it to what you need it to be. Click done. Now, that's everything we need for the events and the actions, but that won't work yet because that's a standalone thing. So it's not going to kick in when you hit an enemy. Okay, for it to kick in when you hit an enemy, you have to do this. Now, watch carefully. In fact, can I? Yeah. I'll zoom this in for you. So what you want to do is click on the very left-hand side of this code so it highlights the whole code. Don't be clicking on any individual thing. Click on this left-hand side here. And then you want to click and hold and drag it. Can you see the black line that appears? Now, that won't do anything. It's just going to stay where it is. You want to click and, you want to click and hold it and drag it and then move it across. Yeah, you kind of have to move it up and across slightly. And can you see the black line get shorter and kind of indent slightly? When it does that, let go. And you can now see that basically this one has a line next to it now, this code. And it means that this code is now a subcode, sub-event of this event. So for this to be checked, this has to check. We could almost call it a parent and child if you're familiar with that terminology, which you will be when you get to Unity. So this has to kick in first, and then this can kick in. Yeah, so this one, and then this one. And only then will this kick in. So let's give that a try. Let's press play. And let's try and jump on the head of one of these enemies. There you go, you can see. So when it hits, it destroys the enemy and you get this nice little bounce that you could make some use of if you want to play with that mechanic. Okay. However, what we don't have yet is, if I just load that up again, if I go through, nothing happens if I just walk through them. And what we want is the player to get killed. Now, these instructions won't include instructions on how to do a health system or a life system. You have instructions on how to do that in the other instructions you've got for the shoot 'em up, and for even the Pong game can be adapted to that. So I'll let you do a health system or a life system yourself. For now, we're just going to say that if you hit an enemy, it restarts the level. Okay. Now, to do this, we're going to add it to this code here. And so what we want to do is add a new event and click on System, click Next. And again, you could scroll down and find this, but rather than do that, and it's there, you could just search it in here, but we want the else thing now. So think about it like this. If you collide with the enemy and you're falling and the enemy's below you, in other words, you're jumping on top of them, this will kick in. But if you collide with an enemy for any other reason, or these things aren't adhering, we want something else to kick in. Now you can see it's in red there at the moment. That's because I've not put this in. So that wants to basically be there. So all I did there was drag it in like I did before and just put it to the bottom. Yeah, so it's basically saying when you collide with an enemy, check for this. Is this happening? Yes. Okay, do this. Is this happening? No. Okay, then else do whatever's on here. And on here, we're basically just going to say, so add an action. We're going to say system, next, go down to layouts here and restart layout. So if you hit an enemy in any other way and it doesn't conform to this, restart the layout. Now let's save that. We haven't saved that in a while. And then let's try that out. Okay, so make sure your previous code still works. So let's jump on this one. Whoops. There you go. And let's walk into this one and what happens. It restarts my layout, so I jump back to the beginning. There we go. Okay. So we now have our collision code in place. We now have the ability to die, and we have the ability to kill our enemies. One last thing then. Let's put this one last thing in before we go. So if we go back to our event sheet, let's click on Add Event, and let's just say that when the player square, so this is the event, next, is outside the borders of the area, so you should find that outside layout, sorry, it was there, size and position is outside layout. Click next, then again let's restart the layout. So add new action, go down, restart layout. Now you may want to adapt this later on, because this means if they jump too high and they hit the top of the layout, it will restart, they'll die. This is mainly for if they fall off a platform, what's going to happen, because at the moment you have to restart the game. So now if you fall off the platform, whoops, it'll restart the game for you. So you can go across, but if you do that, you're out. But you'll probably want to change that code a bit later on to accommodate something a little bit better than that. What I would do is I would put a big bar down here like we did with Pong, and if the player hits that collision, you basically take a life off or restart, whatever you want to do. That way they can jump higher than the top here. They'll go off screen, but it won't kill them. Okay, that's the better solution. But for now, we've got it so that we don't have to keep restarting if we fall off a platform. Okay, that's the end of this video. The next video, we'll be starting on collectibles. See you then.